Welcome to the Odd Thoughts podcast. My name is Gunther and I am your host, and welcome to episode 5. And if you're someone that loves taking the general deep dive into the everyday odd thought or the everyday inquiry, then I appreciate you tuning in and I hope that you enjoy this type of content. And I'm bringing you to you something kind of fun. I've kind of been taking a little while, I guess, to kind of figure this episode out, and I didn't realize kind of how much research I was going to have to do behind the topic, but I thought it was something fun. I'm trying out as much as possible, as many things as possible, and seeing kind of what sticks. And so, today's episode, I'm kind of had of a good idea to kind of flash back in time. You know what I'm saying? You know, take the time machine back to. I was gonna do 20 years ago. Which is kind of always like. That's always like a standard time, like whenever we talk about the past or whatever. Like, it always feels like we always refer to it as like 20 years ago. But I'd said maybe 5 years further, go 25 years ago, which is a quarter century, which, that seems like that sounds to me a little better. And that brings us back to, which kind of crazy to think is it's 1998. For some reason in my head that I always think that like 25 years ago was like the 80s or something like that. I'm just like dumb. But it's 1998 and right before the 2000s, and as I was kind of doing my research and as I was kind of like looking into like what was happening in 1998, I got nostalgic, and it was kind of funny that it's kind of a significant year, and it feels like those years kind of leading up to like 2000, the year 2000 was like they were doing things. A lot of things were moving, and a lot of like technology was advancing, and it felt like a lot of like things were becoming more popular, and it feels like things were becoming more openly accessible to the public or whatever you want to say. So I just had a lot of fun, and I didn't realize how much research I was going to be doing. And so I kind of compiled a bunch of stuff, and I was trying to think about how I was going to format it. And everything was like, yeah, I kind of was looking through like world events, and everything kind of like goes from going from month to month through 1998. And there's obviously movies, and there's music and television, and different products and video games and stuff like that. So I was just like jumbled up and trying to think how I was gonna like format it, if you will. And I decided that I just think, why not just why not just spit out the information and kind of maybe react to it a little bit. I was 1 years old going on two. August of 1998 was when I would have turned two. And then a few months after that, I got my little sister. So, 1998, as far as I know, was a good year for me. So, but things to like the years then to come after 1998, I guess, is like when I started picking things up. Like, it's always like, I've always heard that like when you turn like 5 years old or something like that is like when consciousness really starts to kick in for yourself, and like when you start to remember things. So like, some of the stuff I didn't realize was like kind of from 1998, or like were popular during that time, or like released in 1998. So, and like I said, as I was kind of going along, I was just like, why not? Why not kind of just like spit some stuff out? So, maybe first I'll talk about some like popular events that happen around the world, some popular things, kind of go from month for month, kind of month by month and stuff like that. And then talk about some popular movies, music, television, video games, some products or whatever. I try to get a little bit of everything, and I thought I kind of got a good little collection of information. But just stay tuned with me, and I appreciate y'all tuning into episode 5 of my podcast. And before we get started, if any further, if you want to listen to any other episode of my podcast, I have it up on YouTube. The Odd Thoughts Podcast is what it's called, and I would appreciate any sort of engagement I get. And I'm also on Facebook. My name is Gunther Getlicker. That's my full name. And then it's the same thing on Instagram. It's Gunther underscore Getlicker. And then on Twitter, I go by at one Mike GG. So how exciting! But go check me out on there, and I try to keep it updated as much as possible. But without further ado, let's get into it. So to start out, I guess, like I said, I want to go month by month. I was kind of looking at just like world events that kind of happened in 1998. Like I said, like with subsequent years is when I think like I started understanding things and learning things. So like it was just kind of funny to think. So like I'm gonna go through, I guess, yeah, just month per month, and just talk about some like things that happened during the like around the world. And in January 1998, it was the first like report on Bill Clinton on his reported cheating scandal with Monica Lewinsky. It was the first time that anything had been kind of written on it, and like there was speculation, but it was like the first official report into it. And later in the year, as things will start to take off, as I'll kind of get into. Also, there was as I was also reading, there was a controversial documentary that was released about Kurt Cobain and Courtney Love, and it was controversial because a few of the people that were interviewed in the documentary were kind of like maybe implying or kind of pointing towards thinking that Courtney was murdered Kurt Cobain, or like was like a big contributor to his death. And and as we learned in years, that this woman obviously did love him, and maybe things weren't always perfect, but that's got to be a pretty tough thing to like have such a public thing come out. And I know she had like problems with it, and she was popular at the time. She had like an album come out like that year, so it was kind of like everything was just like just piss poor timing, kind of it felt like. And that's it's we people can believe whatever they want to believe, but in my opinion, I think that he was just a depressed person, and he just couldn't take whatever he couldn't take. And that is a tough thing to kind of realize, especially when he was coming with all that success. And success doesn't equate to necessarily like how you're gonna feel in your emotion. But you would think that like with how much love that there was for Nirvana and Kurt Cobain and stuff like that, that whatever. Though, like I said, I can't delve too deeply into that because as myself, I do feel depressed, but I've never been pushed that far. Also, let's see. Furthermore, um, the Broadway musical of Grease came to an end after what is it, 1,500 performances. And Grease is one of my favorite musicals. You know what I'm saying? I remember watching it as a kid, and I secretly do love Grease too as well. But like to think like 1,500 performances, like that's crazy. That's a lot of performances. So shout out to that. Shout out to think of anything to be able to run that long is crazy. And also, I guess this was like the first year. It said California was one of the first states to ban smoking in like restaurants and casinos and like indoor places like that. I was like, I honestly didn't think it was like kind of like that recent. I kind of thought like that was like an older school thing. I thought we grew out of cigarettes a lot like way longer ago than that. But like, maybe it was like a thing, but it said California was the first state. So I was like, oh, okay, okay. And I didn't realize it was kind of like maybe like that, like recent. But I do remember as a kid, like going into restaurants and they would have like smoking sessions or like non-smoking sessions. I do remember that, I think. So that I guess partially I kind of remember that. And then moving on to February, the first thing I had, I thought it was so funny because I've seen clips of it, but I didn't know like I never really had concept of the timing. But Bill Gates gets pied in the face in Brussels, yeah, yeah, Brussels, Belgium. And that's so funny. Like if you watch the clip, it's just so nonchalant, just like some dude pops out of nowhere, and just pies Bill Gates right in the face. And Bill Gates, I guess, takes it on the chin. And it was an act of protest. I'm pretty sure. I think like that was like the guy who like pied Bill Gates in the face. I think that was kind of like his thing. It was like it was kind of like something he did. Like kind of stood up to like people like Bill Gates, of influence of Bill Gates. And whatever, get a pie to the face every once in a while when you're making billions of dollars. I guess it doesn't matter, huh? The 1998 Winter Olympics took place in Japan. Sorry, the 1998 Winter Olympics took place in Japan, which is pretty cool. I think as a kid, I've always wanted to go to Japan, and I didn't realize that like winters get kind of harsh out in Japan. When you're American, I guess you don't have a very big concept of what the rest of the world is like. So like it's funny when it's just funny thinking like there's a lot of there are mountains in Japan, so like it definitely 100%. And like it gets cold, and I've seen like pictures of Japan with snow, so like it's like that was just dumb to think as a kid, but like that's cool. I think that would be just a cool thing as an Olympian, not only to like represent your country and do like a sport or whatever that you love, but also get to like travel the world, especially when you get to like when you qualify for these like very like big events and these super like professional like the Olympics. Like that's a big time representation. So like it's pretty cool to think to go travel to Japan and like go represent your country and stuff like that. Just get a chance to do that kind of stuff. Elton John was knighted by Queen Elizabeth at the London's Buckingham Palace. So Sir Elton John, sorry, Sir Elton John was knighted. I guess he wasn't a sir yet, but I love Elton John, which is funny. And I guess, yeah, I guess it's also like every time I think of Ben Kingsley, it's Sir Ben Kingsley or whatever, right? Like, Sir Paul McCartney. So I think that is you got to give that distinguishment. That's like something that like I think that's just a respectful thing, right? So like I try my best to make that distinguishment. Sorry, but what else? I also had um, I guess that's it. Oh, former Judas Priest frontman. I think he came back eventually, but former Judas Priest frontman Rob Halford comes out as gay, and that's kind of a big thing. And I think like a misconception maybe in metal music. I think like the metal community is way more accepting than I think what has always been perceived. So like the fact that such a big name and like for such a big band kind of came out as gay, I think that that opened up acceptance in metal music, acceptance in music in general, and he's legendary, and I love Judas Priest. I grew up listening to Judas Priest, and so like I said, just a big name to come out, and like I guess I've always known in my lifetime him to be gay, so it would be kind of I couldn't imagine maybe I could imagine like loving him in the '80s when they were popular, and then like all these years later, and that's also like question of like at the height of Judas Priest's popularity, why wouldn't he have come out? You know what I'm saying? And maybe there wasn't an acceptance of metal music, but like from what I understand, I think metal heads and are in general and metal people who in the metal community, I think are very accepting of people. I think that's generally like the vibe that you get with people in the metal community. On to March. It says that let's see, yeah, March is the first mass-produced portable MP3 player was launched at a German trade fair, which that's pretty cool to think like, especially like now we got like these streaming services and how big like music streaming is like the thing, and then like devices like you can do it on your phone now. You know what I'm saying? So you don't have to have like a separate device to like download all these things, but like that's funny to think like 1998. And that to me kind of feels recent. That does feel recent. Like I remember CD players still for sure. Like I had a CD player growing up and I remember putting the CD in and having the headphones and listening and trying not to move too much. And some of them were said that they were like unskippable, like non-skippable. Like you can like move them around as much as possible and the CD will still play, but like they're always a lie. So like that's funny to think that like and that's such a and now it's like it's an archaic thing to think of like taking your MP3 player, like plugging it into your computer and like having to go on like wherever, like LimeWire, if depending on how sketchy you are, like and downloading just like tons of songs. And but that was kind of cool to think that like the first like majorly produced one, like the one that was majorly available, and it would become like later in the year it would become more popular, and into like I said, that once the 2000s hit, it was like an explosion of technology, and you kind of realized a couple years before 2000, like I said, like 97, maybe 98, 99, they're all very like significant. And what else? Let's see. There was the Galileo probe indicates that Jupiter's moon Europa has a liquid ocean under a thick crust of ice, which I thought that was pretty cool. As I keep going, like a couple, like I felt like there was a lot of advancements in like space, like investigate discovery more so, not investigation leading into discovery, And also in March, the High Z Supernova Search Team becomes the first team to publish evidence that the universe is moving at a more accelerated rate than ever before believed, which that's cool too to think like because I think you can it's not it's also it's real it's currently it's hard to think of the vastness of space for most people, I think, right? Sorry for the stuttering, but it's crazy to think how big space is and to think that it's expanding at a crazy rate and it's like consistently increasing over time. Like that's crazy. It's in the fact that that just blows your mind. That makes space a little crazy to think. Like I'm more scared of the ocean than I'm scared of space, but like that doesn't make space. It makes space so vast and makes it so like it's just that adventurousness of it feels like like thinking about like going out there and like discovering like new planets and like what we've seen like especially recently like even like now like these pictures of like exploding stars and like faraway galaxies and like some of the first like things we've ever been that's ever been photographed finally getting back to us and or whatever type thing, the furthest things we could see in the galaxy. And so that's cool. And it felt like I said in 1998 it felt like there was a lot of those things, and like that's kind of a crazy thing. It's just crazy to think how far technology is. It's with moving technology, how it's not only just the person's interaction with technology, but it's like the world's interaction with technology, or just out of the world technology, you know what I'm saying? Spaceships and stuff. Moving on to April. April was kind of a slow month. They only had a couple things. It said Lollapalooza was canceled for like I think the first time. It was first because it just didn't have a headliner. Which Lollapalooza, when you think it's like one of the biggest festivals, right? Every year, it's one of the biggest like music events or whatever, or like events or whatever every year. So like the fact that they had to cancel was crazy. And I read that it was because it was just like a decline in like alternative music, which was like the kind of the whole production of like of Lollapalooza, right? Which it still is kind of it's the alter, Lollapalooza gives a chance for like not only big stars to play, but like up and coming stars too. But at that time, I guess there just wasn't anybody they found interesting or whatever, or like they just couldn't get anybody signed, which is it's crazy to think that you would have to cancel a whole event like that, especially when maybe you had like all these other people that are already signed on. And I should have looked at the list of like if there were like already all these other bands, but I slipped on that, and that's crazy to think. And later in the month they had Disney's Animal Kingdom open up, which I feel like as a kid, like not only wanted to go to like Disney World or Disneyland. Disney World's the one with Animal Kingdom, but like to think that like I like think about those like amazing adventurous like amusement parks. Like I got a chance to go to Six Flags living here in Texas, which is amazing, or even the State Fair, which is amazing. Like those are amazing places to go. But like I've always wanted to go like adventure or go to Universal Studios or something like that. So Animal Kingdom, one of those places, like kind of thinking like how cool that would be, like feeling like you're on a safari or something like that, just feeling like you're, going through the Animal Kingdom. Oh, I guess that's a clever name. But 1998, yeah. So it's been around for a long time, and it's still popular, and it's still a big attraction, and that's kind of funny. It's obviously, like I said, I wouldn't have concept of it, being in 1998, being one going on two, but in the subsequent years, like I said, it became such a popular thing. Moving on to May, the first thing I had is Israeli singer Dana International becomes the first ever trans winner of Eurovision, which I thought that was cool. Eurovision is like something that's not maybe it's not overtly like American, advertly American. You know what I'm saying? It's more of like the international aspect of it, but like. I think that like the first just shout out to the first trans like winner ever, and also like Israel, like that's what I think is also cool about Eurovision is like you get like all this variety. It's like every year you'll find like a different country or something like that. And then sometimes countries will like come and sweep a couple years, you know what I'm saying? Like they just have that kind of act or that kind of talent. But she's from Tel Aviv, if I said that right. But that was kind of cool. Yeah, Dana International is the name, which is a great name. Just like that's a star name. That's definitely a star name. That's cool. And then I had Mercedes bought Chrysler for $40 billion that in March or sorry May sorry, and I thought that was crazy. Just thinking how big those companies were, and I remember Chryslers, and I remember like Chrysler cars, like the Chrysler 300 and stuff like that. And I just never thought about like how like Mercedes, like obviously Mercedes being like one of the biggest car brands ever. You know what I'm saying? And $40 billion, just a really light purchase, if you ask me, for sure. What else? The Galaxy 4 communication satellite failed, which left 80 to 90% of US pagers without service. Which is funny. It's just the pagers. That's such a distant memory. Just hearing like being in public, hearing people beep at the from their hip, and people like pull up and like like having to read a phone number or like there was like certain like codes or whatever the heck you could do or whatever like. But that's a distant memory because those were even like I felt like even in like 1998, those were like a dying thing anyways. Were pagers. So it's just funny to think like 80 to 90% though. That's a lot of pagers. That's a lot of people. Hopefully nobody was busy that day. Hopefully everybody was just at home. It was like a holiday or something like that. Let's see in May. What was it like May? It said like May 19th. So, maybe they didn't have much going on. Also it's the same day I think because I have it like listed under the same like date as the wreck of the aircraft carrier USS Yorktown was which went down during the Battle of Midway was recovered, which is cool. Just something historic. Like that's something that always in my mind that I've always wanted to do is like not only go see like I've seen like old battleships, but like go like more so like discover something old and like be like the first one to discover something. Like that's like a pipe dream, but like that's kind of cool. My adventurous little mind, like I kind of that's always kind of been cool to think and just think about that. Like just even a thought to maybe try to go look for something like that and like maybe people like maybe it starts with like an amateur fisherman or amateur boatsman like going out there and finding out or seeing something and then it goes back to the military and they're like well let's make this mission to go try to find it and that's a pretty cool thing. and especially being such a historic battle, the Battle of the Midway, that going down there in that time, and like I said, all this time later, people still wanted to come back. It was 56 years later, 1942 to 1998. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of crazy. What else did I have? 6.5 magnitude earthquake hits northern Afghanistan, killing up to 5,000 people. No, that's a little gloom, but 6.5 magnitude, that's big. In Texas, we don't really get earthquakes like that, but 6.5 is huge. And I guess, like, I don't know what I think about, like, when I think, like, I guess, earthquakes don't happen in Afghanistan or something like that, but I just like to hear like a country like that, like, and then like 5,000 people's a lot, and that would have hit a significant place in Afghanistan. So that's a crazy thing, and very fortunate to live in a place where we get tornadoes in Texas and stuff like that, but like we don't get earthquakes like that. So moving on to June, I had the 1998 FIFA World Cup in France. France won that World Cup, just so happened to be that way, which is cool. I don't really think of France as like as a powerhouse in soccer, like, but it's cool to think and like not only like go to the World Cup to represent your country, like I was talking about with the Olympics earlier, but then also to win it in your country, like have it in your country and win it. That's kind of cool. And beating Brazil, which Brazil is a country that has been good at soccer for 100 years or whatever the heck. Like, so to think that, like, to beat a good team, and they beat them 3-0, I think is what I had. Yeah, 3-0, which I think is crazy, which is very insane. Um, Also, let's yeah, and then earlier in the month, I skipped over. Sorry. Earlier in the month, there was a train disaster in Germany that killed 101 people and then like injured 100 other people. Which around that time, I always like it makes me think of like the like late '90s, early 2000s makes me think of the movie Unbreakable with Bruce Willis, where he gets in the train wreck and he's like the only one that survives and he has no scars on him and he like has like the superhuman strength and he's like a superhero basically. But it makes me think that was if that's what it was based off of. But that's crazy. And it was like at the time it was like the worst high speed rail disaster. Like at the time it was the worst one. And then it was like the second worst in like train disaster in Germany, I think at the time. But that's just crazy to think, and something I think at the time, thinking about like that danger of like the high speed rail and the popularization, I think in the '90s more so, and not we think of like maybe the subway, but like above ground high speed rails and stuff like that. And so that's a tragic thing. And yeah, 200 people total of like that were affected by it, which is unfortunate. And moving on to July, Japan launches the Nozomi space probe to Mars and joined the space race kind of finally. They had a space program for multiple years before, but it was like the first time that they actually launched a probe up. It was called the Nozomi, is if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And I think I read something that stands for hope, I think. And it was their first official race into the space race, like their first official entry into the space race. And they sent it to Mars, and I don't know. And I think I read that it didn't reach Mars, but it did get it got far. It got out of orbit and stuff like that. I'm pretty sure. That's pretty cool. We could just think of like the United States and Russia, and really truly that is still till this day. There's only a few countries that are in like the theoretical space race that really are have joined that. And to think that like really only the whole space thing has only been around for what like 60 years, like where we've actually tried where we've gotten to space and actually like been to space and stuff like that. So that's kind of it's still fresh. We still got time, you know what I'm saying? But just to think the advancements that even like someone like Elon Musk is making, right? And like, everybody feels like they got a space program now, every billionaire, which is scary to think a little bit, but still cool to think. And then also in July, it went from July, it started in July, but it went through to September. In Sydney, Australia, there was a water crisis, where their water was like contaminated, and they had to like give like multiple advisories to boil your water, which is something I even think like just generally with like tap water, but to think that like a lot of stuff like the filter thing I guess wasn't really that popular in the late '90s. I don't think like I don't really remember like my fridge even having like a water dispenser and stuff like that when I was like a little kid, like the house that I grew up in and stuff like that. Like so that's scary to think. And it was like was it contaminated with like different cryptosporidium. Sorry. I'm sorry for mispronouncing that, and like other like little microbacteria like that bacteria and stuff like that. And that's scary to think. And it led to the conversation of the water supply, like the taking care of it, and like the process that they had before, and it's always kind of brings up the question of like like how long does something go on until it doesn't function anymore or something like that. And then what else do I have? I also have a man by the name of Russell Eugene Weston Jr. entered the Capitol building and killed two members in the Capitol building, one member of the Capitol Police, and then uh, I forget what the other guy's name is, but one guy's name was Jacob Chestnut, and the other guy's name was John Gibson, which is crazy to think. And they said they think the shooter, Russell Eugene Weston Jr., had schizophrenia and just had a general distrust in the government and stuff like that. And mental illness is still something that maybe isn't taken very seriously today. I think we affirm it more, and we don't necessarily still help it. And that's an unfortunate loss. So, and you got to have someone that's willing to get help, and some people just don't know. Like, and especially when you've been raised in a scenario or an environment where like the help isn't like something that people look for, then you're not gonna know to go look for help. So, it's an unfortunate thing, and you should never take it out on people, obviously. Quickly moving on to August, trying to get through it a little more quickly. The Second Congo War begins, which was responsible for 5.4 million people dying between 1998 and 2003. Which I've heard that number is kind of maybe inflated a little bit. Maybe not all of them were like direct casualties of like war, like on the battlefield type thing, but like affected like from the other stuff, like from the outer regions of stuff, which was like one of the bloodiest wars in since World War II. Which is crazy to think, like all that time having passed, like the 50 years, and to think like the war is going to be an inevitable thing. It feels like in the world. So, and in at that time there was a big revolution, or like there's a big push in Africa, and there still is a revolution going on, or like I don't want to say maybe I don't know revolution. I think that's misspeaking in my part, but like there's always conflict in every country, but in Africa it always feels like there is something. What else? There's what else I had in August as long as well is the Tribe Called Quest is one of my favorite hip hop groups of all time, disbanded, which I was like, oh man, what? I was like, that's unfortunate. Which I didn't know them in 1998, but like to come and discover them in the years since, like to think they had like a 10-year stretch really, and that's all you really need. It makes me think of like Outkast is my favorite hip hop group of all time, and Andre 3000 is my favorite rapper, and they had same about 10 years, you know what I'm saying? Like, but like to think of the music that they put out in that time. And I love listening to a Tribe Called Quest, and I'll forever listen to them. And I think their last album was The Love Movement. This is what I think it was called. Yeah, I think so. I might talk about it in a second here. And then what else? And then towards the end of August is the first time that they got Bill Clinton, the president, to actually admit on tape that he had lied to the people and that he was actually involved with Monica. So now the ball's rolling. Now and that's crazy. Like I always think about like that clip of him like getting up on stage and like I did not have sexual relations with that woman, and then the months later saying like I did have sexual relations with that woman. Like, oh, Bill, you dog. I always think of his like representation in Family Guy, like there's a saxophone playing, like just doofus. Just like somehow became president at a very fortunate time in like the world, or like not the world, but the USA. Because the USA is not the world. But at the time when like we were in like a profit, like we actually were like making money in the country because of like technological advances and just how the world was functioning at that time around or like how we moved in the world more so. Moving on to September, Google was founded in September 1998, which is kind of crazy. I guess their first headquarters was Menlo Park, California, by Stanford University PhD candidate Larry Page and Sergey Brin. That's pretty cool. Google has been my whole life. I use Google all the time. So the simple fact that like it's still it's still a modern thing, and like they said that just the idea to take advantage of the early internet, and not thinking of something also that nobody would like know, like how vast the internet was becoming, and like how like it was hard to maybe reach all the corners of the internet. So what do you make? You make a search engine, something you could literally connect every website to, basically, which is cool. I use Google for everything. I Google a lot of stuff. Everybody Googles. If you haven't Googled, you're not living. I Google medical advice. I Google just advice. I Googled everything to look for this information. Like I literally Googled all these stuff, like all these things, all these stuffs, man. all these things. So that's that's pretty cool. And then late like literally right at the end of September, there was a bill that was passed that limits the paparazzi's like interactions with celebrities. It was called the Privacy Protection Act of 1998, which limited what paparazzi could do and like how close they can get to celebrities, and it allowed celebrities or people who are like being followed by paparazzi to like to feel like their invaded their privacy was being invaded. And it was actually like the first time that like a little bit of a wall was drawn. As we know, it's not that tight of a it's not that high of a wall, and it's not a not those closed of curtains. You know what I'm saying? So it's very much so like it feels like it's still invasive. You know, to think that was if it took how long celebrity or so-called celebrity quote unquote, how long that's been around. To think how long it's been around, and now they had something finally in 1998, which is crazy. Moving on to October, something I literally, which is funny, when I was doing this research, I ended up watching a video kind of like randomly. And at the beginning of October, there was a man named Matthew Shepard, who was a University of Wyoming student, who was gay, who was killed, beaten outside of Laramie, Wyoming, which I think is where the University of Wyoming was. And that's a crazy story. And it was the first, not maybe the first time, but it was like a widely televised event that I think kind of opened up the idea of homophobic likeness in America and like gay hate and stuff like that. And it's probably tough to use such a young man like, and I know that from what I was reading and like from what I've heard is like he was kind of troubled, like not only being maybe like kind of he wasn't closeted gay, I don't think, but like I know that he struggled with like I think drugs, and then I think other stuff. I don't know his personal life, but it doesn't mean he deserved it. But it kind of just that question of like then using him as that kind of that martyr post death, you know. And it's unfortunate, but it did open up that conversation and a fair conversation to have. You know, unfortunately, a young man died, and that they did catch the two people. And I think also they had a story about like that Matthew Shepard was selling drugs. I think even like and that like he had like a like heroin or something like that, and he had like enough to like for them to like steal and sell off themselves, and that was more the motivation. Maybe, probably, I don't know, but maybe. Let's see, what else is there? The Copyright Term Extension Act was signed, which I thought was just kind of a cool thing. It like extended copyright stuff from things that were released 1970, 78 or later, which is cool. I never really I think had the conception of what copyright laws are, or even like what you can do in the copyright laws, or like what's fair use. And that's a question with being involved with YouTube and like I knowing YouTubers and stuff like that. That stuff they always question is like what is copyright, and like what's still in the public domain and what's not in the public domain. And so like they passed an act, or is it a law, or it's a law in 1998 that extended everything 20 years. So it was like originally like 50 years, and then it went to like 70, and then like there's like another thing that if it's like a corporation or something like that, it went from like 75 to like 95 years. So like for a while, like a lot of these things like things that are released now like won't be into the public domain until like 2090, almost the year 2100, which is crazy to think. That's a long time away. That's crazy. But I think the like I said, copyright is like it's like a up in the air kind of thing. Moving on to November, the Voyager 1, which was launched in 1977, passes Pioneer 10 as the most distant man-made object that was launched into the solar system, which is crazy. Um, to think that like it's still out there too, and it's supposed to be out until like, or like we have like connection to it till 2036. So just to think that thing is just floating out there, sending us back signals, and I think at some time we'll lose connection. I don't know if that's like I don't know if that's like 2036 is when we're losing connection to it, or if that's when it's like officially gone out into the rest of space or whatever, type thing. And but that's just cool. Space, like I said, space is expansive and it's huge and it's very scary to think. But it's funny to think that something that it took 20 years to get to even like where the Pioneer 10 was, and Pioneer 10 was launched in like whatever like a few years before that. And we'll probably still launch things all the time. So constantly things are going to keep popping up. So and that's cool too. That's cool to think too, honestly. What else? And then what else? And yeah, let's see. Yeah, and later in November, like a few weeks after that, they was the first time that the first piece of the International Space Station, sorry, the Zarya module was launched by the Russians. It was the first piece of the International Space Station. Space Station, sorry. International Space Station. So I think that was pretty cool. And I knew the Russians were the first people to like start building it, and it was kind of like their, I think maybe idea or whatever. And arguably the first people to the race space or whatever. The first people in space, whatever. But that's a cool thing. And then eventually America would send their piece up, like I think like literally the next month. But that's an amazing thing. The Zarya module, the 21 tons, that's crazy. A lot of rocket fuel to launch that thing up. And then within like a week after that, there was a controversy with the 2002 Winter Olympics with Salt Lake City, where like Salt Lake City had like under the table like bribed a bunch of the committee members to like get them bidded, and like because they had like failed like a bunch of times before that. But then like in 1995 they like finally won all of a sudden, like with some bribes underneath the table, and then they were okayed for 2002, but they were investigated a couple times before, and it found out that like yeah they were bribing, but they still held it, so it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's sketchy, whatever, but it doesn't matter. It's just the Winter Olympics. It don't matter. Just to think though they wanted it that badly, like Salt Lake City. I've never been, and I want to go to Salt Lake City, but like probably a city that wasn't very widely popular at the time, and so having the Winter Olympics come through is definitely going to be a big time representation. You know what I'm saying? So then moving on to December, the last of the year, ExxonMobil was formed. Exxon bought Mobil, sorry, not mobile, but Mobil for $73.7 billion, which I think is inflated a little bit. It's like 80 something billion dollars, but like that's crazy. $73.7 billion. And now, I always think of like ExxonMobil, like I always think of them together, not separately. So to think that like that's a huge, and it was like one of the biggest mergers at the time or something like that, which is insane to think about. And then a little bit after, a couple days after that is when when the United States finally launched their part of the International Space Station. Like I said, it was like a pretty fast response, and I think like two of these major super countries, especially like when it came to being in space, like two countries that heavily pursued it, like it was cool to come together and create something like that, and something that's useful and is still in use today. And maybe one day we'll get another or a few more. You know what I'm saying? We'll be living out in space with Elon, Musk the seventh or whatever the heck, like he just how many kids he has now. It's kind of crazy. Like he's trying to build a whole like human race of his own, like people. That's crazy. A couple weeks after that, December 19th is when Bill Clinton became impeached. Was officially the first president to be impeached, officially impeached or something like that, right? Or no, sorry, second president. I'm dumb. Second president to be impeached. Sorry. That's kind of crazy, just from getting a little hanky panky in the Oval Office. He couldn't keep away. I think I heard that they bonded. Him and Monica Lewinsky bonded off of Sarah McLachlan. Their love for Sarah McLachlan, which I understand. Arms of an Angel, and then that one song from Toy Story 2, right? Those are good songs. And Sarah McLachlan had a hold on all of us in the late '90s. So, but it's unfortunate, but like maybe he wasn't necessary. You could always argue not a great president, anyways. And yeah, and then I guess I have the last thing. I have the Khmer Rouge leaders apologize for post-Vietnam War genocide in Cambodia, which was responsible for like a couple million people dying in the 70s. Which sorry, a little slap on the wrist, whatever. Like that, what's that gonna do? And a couple million people, that's crazy. And I've heard that that number could be inflated too. So I don't really know, but just to think that like you take all those years later, wait 30 years or 20 something years later, then to apologize for your war crimes, which is crazy. Yeah, but that's from like month to month. That's kind of crazy to think all that kind of stuff happening right before the 2000s. And that's a lot of stuff. And in those few years before 2000, like I said, it felt like that was like a very significant time in the world. And 2000 was very popular because it's that turn of the millennium. And so the couple years before that would make sense to become, super significant. Some other I did have some other facts that like I just didn't have like a place to put them because I didn't know dates and stuff like that, and they didn't really have dates. But I read that the federal minimum wage in 1998 was 5.15 an hour, and the median household income was $38,000 568. Yeah, $38,568. Sorry, and the average price for a car was $17,000. So how do you like that? To live now, you need like double that to like live comfortably, which is crazy. And the minimum wage hasn't really even gone up that much. In some places, they're trying to raise it, but hasn't really even gone up that much. And some of the popular baby names was Jacob, Michael, Matthew, Joshua, Emily, Hannah, Samantha, and Ashley, which I know a lot of those types of people and a lot of those people with those names. And that kind of fits. They're all born in the late 90s, so it kind of makes sense. And probably from characters, movies, from stuff, That's pretty funny. Um, I had Apple introduced the iMac as well as Internet Explorer passed Netscape as the internet browser market like share for the first time. It like finally passed it and it was like the biggest like like Internet Explorer like obviously the name of it, but Netscape. That's funny. That's a name that like I barely remember from like the late 90s, early 2000s. Like that like is so ingrained in the back of my mind. Internet Explorer even now is dead. So to even think like that, that's crazy. That's crazy. Full on, just like full circle. And I had some things I was trying to think of like I was trying to think of like the different like fashion trends that people used to wear. And I was thinking like low rise jeans were very popular and baggy jeans became like kind of popular at that time. All the like tiny accessories, like people having like tiny sunglasses or like a tiny purse or puffy like things like a puffy hat, a bucket hat, a trucker hat, um, like baby tees, crop tee, or like maybe not necessarily crop, but like baby tees, like this is a 10 sizes too small type thing. And I thought that was pretty funny. That's stuff that very significant. Like I remember in my head and like as I go into like you watch movies from that time and like TV and you like anything from that time, you're like, oh my god, it just transports you right back. And arguably, some people still live in that time. They still live wearing that stuff. And then I had some popular products that came out in 1998 were Furbies, the little homies, the little like homies that came out and like the coin dispensers. You know what I'm saying? The Living Dead dolls, which were like these random like you'd find them in Spencer's. If you ever been to Spencer's, you've 100% seen Living Dead dolls. And then I also had the BlackBerry 950, which was like one of the first like internationally available Blackberries, I think. And then I had Fisher Price's Imagine Next figures. You know what I'm saying? Fisher Price had the little people, but then they made the Imagine Next, and they were like you could have like a pirate set or like a you're like had the firefighters and like they were like I think they had some that were like miniature figures, but then they had like some bigger ones. I think because I remember having like a few like a collection of them. And then also the Batman and Robin action figures were popular because of the animated series, and then like the George Clooney Batman, and before that the Val Kilmer Batman. Like I love Batman Forever, which is the Val Kilmer one. It's my favorite Batman. I don't give a who cares. I care. Obviously, I care, but it was the animated series I remember just as much, and that was very popular at the time. And I remember having some of the action figures, and then Star Wars action figures were really big at the time because the prequels had come out, or like the first one, the episode one had come out, and so it was like a whole new, like love and like reviving of the Star Wars franchise. And I remember people, friends of mine having Star Wars stuff. I just wasn't very into Star Wars. And then I had Tamagotchi, which is pretty funny. I 100% had Tamagotchi, and I remember my older sister Kara having Tamagotchi as well. And I think they still make Tamagotchi. I think, or do you have to like buy like an old Tamagotchi that just somehow still runs? Like I'm sure that replacing the battery in it is not that hard. But that's pretty funny. Those are very prominent products I remember too, like Furbies, especially like the little homies. I thought that was funny. I thought that was really funny. And then I had listed some food products because like I don't know if these were made in 1998, but it was just funny to think of like everything like they had like baby bottle pops, they had the Dunkaroos, Scooby snacks, which I used to mess up some Scooby snacks. They had Crystal Pepsi, which I've never had Crystal Pepsi, but I know that was a popular thing. They did Funfetti was apparently a popular thing. Any like Funfetti anything, not just cake, but like Funfetti whatever. Which is crazy to think. Like, I don't know what funfetti is. So, and then they had yeah, Jello cakes. They had the Jello pudding bites, which I think I remember the pudding bites for some reason. And then they had Lunchables. Lunchables was pretty popular at that time, which I remember it being pretty popular in the early 2000s. And I know Lunchables were around before that. I just know that like around that time is when they became like super popular. And then yeah, and then Uncrustables. Uncrustables, God. I love Uncrustables. I love Uncrustables. That's hilarious. All right. That's like the random information I had. And then It's kind of good. I guess I'll move quickly through the rest of it, but like I didn't know where to put like any movies or like music and like television and video games. I didn't know like how to fit it in like my month per month, breakdown, I guess, really. So I just wrote down a couple like, of movies and then I wrote down like some albums and like songs that came out and certain TV shows and just highlight the ones that were popular, or at least the ones that were my favorite or some of the ones I love. And so first movies. The top 10 movies were Armageddon was number one, Saving Private Ryan was number two, Godzilla was number three, There's Something About Mary was number four, five was A Bug's Life, six was Deep Impact, seven was Milan, eight was Doctor Dolittle, nine was Shakespeare in Love, and then number 10 was Lethal Weapon 4. What? I didn't even know they made four. That's funny. Armageddon number one though. That's pretty. To think how like Saving Private Ryan is such a legendary movie, and Milan, how impactful that was, and then to think that like number one was Armageddon. But that's just based off of grossing. It wasn't like the number one most reviewed movie or whatever. It was the highest grossing, but that movie makes me cry. I don't care. I love Armageddon, and it's an amazing movie to me, and it's a Michael Bay movie, which I didn't know until like years later, but it's a great movie, and every single movie on that list is a hitter. Like Saving Private Ryan, me and my dad were just talking about this movie, and it's got to be the best opening to any movie. Just the simple realism of like storming the beaches of Normandy and how many people were just like how quick people were dying at that point. And that's tough. And I think it was the first time that war was depicted in such a serious light, and it wasn't depicted as like a hero story, and that's amazing. And then things like A Bug's Life and Milan, specifically Milan, but those movies kind of the Ford the Milan was like one of the I think one of the best Disney movies of all time, and it's a really great story and a female empowerment story, which was becoming like a very popular thing at that time, especially. And then like A Bug's Life was like the forward like a big forward step in 3D animation along with Toy Story and stuff like that. So it was a big time for animation, and like I said, Mulan. Shout out to my little sister. She suggested Mulan. Shout out. But I love Mulan. I always say that like I loved like a movie like that and like a movie like Matilda, which didn't come out in 1998, but still like these movies about like these young women being powerful, like and being like being courageous and like having like doing things on their own. I thought it was a good representation for having a little sister, and Mulan. I really appreciate that movie till this day, and I will always appreciate that movie. And then maybe some duds like Godzilla. If you ever watch, it's got Matthew Broderick. I always think it's the one person I think of in that movie, Matthew Broderick and Godzilla. And I know that they had I'll talk about it, I guess, in a little bit, but they had a TV series and a cartoon around it too. So how great. Godzilla had a whole rebirth and a terrible movie. And I would say 100% the ones that were made like the one that was like made like 10 years ago, with Aaron Taylor Johnson. I think that one's pretty exceptional. And I'm glad that that's like there to erase the 2001, or at least in my mind. And then I wrote down some other movies that weren't necessarily the highest grossing movies, but were, I mean, like to ignore them is like kind of dumb. Blues Brothers 2000, The Borrowers, Wedding Singer is arguably could be Adam Sandler's best movie. Maybe you can argue it. Maybe you don't have to argue it. Whatever. The Big Lebowski. There was also Three Ninjas, High Noon at Mega Mountain, dude. I got a soft spot for the Three Ninjas franchise like crazy, like crazy. And that's a fourth movie in their franchise. The fact that they even made two is crazy. But and then they had He Got Game, which has got Ray Allen and Denzel Washington in it, which is a great movie, and Mila Jokovic, which I love Mila Jokovic. And then Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, Brave Little Toaster Goes to Mars, The Truman Show, Small Soldiers. They also had Blade come out, which Blade was the reason that Marvel kind of was able to make like the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies, and then eventually, which started Marvel Studios, which made Iron Man, the Avenger movies, all the amazing movies that we kind of get today. That's a Blade. You can thank Blade. You can thank if you see Wesley Snipes in the public, you thank him. You thank him for your Captain America movies and your Guardians of the Galaxy movies. And then they had Rush Hour, Adam's Family Reunion, which I think is like my favorite Adams Family one. Like the Adams Family, the first one, like with Raul Julia and Angelica Houston and Christina Ricci and Christopher Lloyd. Like that's a great movie, but it's a reunion. That one's funnier, way funnier. And then also Casper Meets Wendy, which is Hilary Duff. the first Casper movie has Christina Ricci, which is funny, and then the second one's got Hilary Duff, just two big names and the child stars in the '90s. And I remember Casper Meets Wendy more so. I remember having the VHS for that one, and it's still to this day I watch that movie. I don't care. A Night at the Roxbury also came out. Ants, which was basically just like a copy of A Bug's Life. Bride of Chucky, which is a close personal favorite of mine. Practical Magic, which first time I think I ever really saw Nicole Kidman in a movie. Yeah, and Sandra Bullock for sure. I think like the first Sandra Bullock, maybe Speed was like the first like movie I saw her in, but first time of those two ladies were like kind of big time movies too as well. Halloween Town, which every Halloween, you can expect me to watch Halloween Town 100%. The Waterboy as well. So Adam Sandler just knocking it out of the park with two movies that year. I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, which is the sequel to I Know What You Did Last Summer. If you ever watched I Still Know What You Did, I Still Know What You Did Last Summer. If you ever watched that one, they get like a trip to the Bahamas, and it's got brandy in it. So it's enough about that. That's all you really need. And then the Rugrats movie was made. Babe was made. Patch Adams, which is it's close to my heart. A Stepmom, which is really close to my heart as well. And then the remake of Psycho. And if you ever want to watch the remake of Psycho, it's really not that bad. And I've heard people like I don't know. I one time said I made a controversial statement one time saying that I'd rather watch the remake of Psycho than the sequel of Psycho that they had from like the '70s or whatever it was made. Controversial, but if you ever want to see that movie, it's kind of crazy. It's got Vince Vaughn as Norman Bates, and it's a little more eccentric. Still a great movie, nonetheless. And so many other movies. I would suggest anybody go look at like all those movies that came out. It's tons of movie. And it felt like 1998, and maybe this is because like it's just me just looking at that one year, like, but like it felt like 1998 just was like a hitter after hitter after hitter of every good movie you could ever possibly want, or especially ones that like I think my generation we all kind of like have as our favorites a little bit. Like a lot of those movies are like movies that we speak fondly of, that we remember fondly of. And then excuse me, sorry. And then I wrote down some film debuts, some actors and actresses that like was their first film, which I thought was kind of crazy. Like Kristen Bell's first film, Polish Wedding. Wes Bentley in Three Below Zero, which is funny just thinking of his Yellowstone fame nowadays. I love American Beauty. Yeah, American Beauty, which is Wes Bentley was in as well. Kind of like around that time, a couple years after, I guess. And then they had Tay Diggs and How Stella Got Her Groove Back, which I love that movie. It's the first time I ever saw Angela Bassett. Fell in love with Angela Bassett. And I think I remember having the VHS. I don't know why I remember that movie so vividly. Either like one of the first movies I saw on like on TV, or I remember the VHS, something like that. And then Josh Hartnett in Halloween H2O, which is pretty funny. Vera Farmiga in Return to Paradise. They also had Kate Hudson in Desert Blue. Taraji P Henson in Streetwise. Just like a bunch of freaking hitters. Just a bunch of like big time names. Cillian Murphy in The Tale of Sweetie. Yeah, Sweetie Barrett. Yeah, The Tale of Sweetie Barrett. Kind of a funny name. And then yeah, Dax Shepard, which is Kristen Bell's husband in Hair Shirt. Crazy. Just and Lindsay Lohan in The Parent Trap. I had a lot of these actually written down. A lot more than I thought. A lot more than I thought. Excuse me. But that's kind of crazy. Those are a lot of big names. A lot of people that we think of today as like these kind of big names. These huge like celebrities. And to think that they started at a young age, like every one of us. You know what I'm saying? And like I said, maybe it's just me like feeding into like just only researching 1998. But that feels like a lot of big names and a lot of big movies and stuff like that. But moving on a little bit, making a little bit of a transition into music. I was laughing pretty hard. I This one's a little shorter because like just like it was like a little. It's more music's a little difficult because like CDs can become popular and songs become popular years later, and so like I don't always think about this stuff, but I was like laughing at like all the hit songs that were coming out from that time and how literally I till this day I like listen to these songs, like I'll pop them on all the time. Like 3 a.m. by Matchbox, which is one of my favorite songs. Shares Believe, which is hilarious to think about. Also, Doo Wop, That Thing by Lauryn Hill. The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill came out in 1998, which is one of my top 10 favorite albums of all time, 100%. And I'll get into a couple other albums in 1988, but Lauryn Hill just killing it in 1998, 100%. Freak on a Leash by Korn. Dragula by Rob Zombie, like literally two songs that are ingrained in my young mind from listening to my older sister listening to. Like It's funny. And Backstreet's Back. Everybody Backstreet's Back was in 1998. Limp Bizkit got famous with their version of Faith, which is a George Michael song. And honestly, you can hate on Limp Bizkit all you want, but it's kind of a good version of the song, and I kind of like listening to it. I don't care. I don't care. Fly Away by Lenny Kravitz. One Hit Me Baby One More Time by Britney Spears, I think was 1998. Getting Jiggy with It with Will Smith. It's crazy. A tons of, and then what else? Yeah, just tons of freaking songs. My Hero by Foo Fighters, tons of songs, and tons of other songs. Those are just a few songs. And just thinking about like until this day, I listen to a lot of those songs, and it's funny to think like at the time I would have never known, like I was too young, but just I had an older sister and having like my mom listen to a lot of the same music, and my dad, like, I just that's were all my influences. And I think I benefited from that, kind of like having all these different people like in my life that had all these different tastes. And then I was like also reading some albums that more specifically that like I listened to, like are like some of my favorites. Like Outkast's Aquemini came out that year, and I will always say that album Aquemini is my favorite Outkast album, and probably my favorite hip hop album of all time. I mean, it's really hard to argue that, for me at least. Like, it's an amazing album. And Andre 3000 is my favorite rapper of all time. And in 1998, they had like just a good span of, like I said, they were around for like 10 years together, and they had a few good albums. And to think from like their first album to their second album being AT Aliens, and in the third album being Aquemini, and literally just like major steps each album. And then, like I said, Lawrence Hill, The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, like that's an amazing album. Tribe Called Quest, The Love Movement, which is a great album also, like a legendary hip hop album. I think at this point you could say legendary for sure. What else? System of a Down, self-titled System of a Down came. That album came out. I don't know if that was their first album. I should have looked that up, but System of a Down, just a band that like 100% I remember from, as I think is like a late 90s, early 2000 band. Corn Follow the Leader, which is the prominent album, which comes with a Freak on the Leash song. Um, what else? What else did I have? In Sync, self-titled In Sync. What's up? Beastie Boys, Hello Nasty. Literally albums that like either I've listened to later in life and didn't know were from 1998, or literally as a kid growing up, like listening to these albums, seeing these CDs popped into the CD player. Just funny to think. And how, and some of these, like I said, the relevance of these songs is which kind of blow my mind, just these albums, and how they still are good. And I will always I still bump CDs. I don't care. I have a, I just like, I like it's like the modern day record. It's a little stupid to put it that way, and not as valuable as a record, but I have so much fun, and I'm gonna keep bumping those CDs, and I will always bump those songs, and it's just funny. Tons of great songs. Matchbox 23 a.m. How does that song like immediately comes in? 3 a.m. I'm getting lonely. I love me some Rob Thomas, I think was his name, was the lead singer's name. Just a quick little note on music. I feel like I said, I feel like music sometimes just like waves in popularity more than like movies do. Because I think movies sometimes can be more a reflection of like that time period, especially visually. Whereas songs, like, it's emotional. It comes with a different emotional connection. But moving on quickly again, like TV. I've never really been a big TV person, but 100% before like there were streaming services, TV was the thing, and I think TV popped in like the 80s and 90s. Really, truly, like that's when everything was like exploding. I feel like they were throwing everything at the wall, and they were seeing what's stuck, and a lot of great shows were formed, and it's all the way into the late 90s. And I was laughing at some of the most popular shows at that time. Seinfeld stopped in 1998, is I think, as if I'm not mistaken, and to think how long it was, like 10 years of just total dominance at like number one, or at least in the top five, of all time, at least at that time. And then there was ER was one of the most popular shows. Friends, which until this day is popular. Sorry. And also Home Improvement, which is hilarious to think like that movie. I don't know if that show was ever truly that great, but it was popular. Everybody had the family sitcom was popular, I guess more so. Walker Texas Ranger was really big. Law and Order was that makes sense. It's something I watching those old episodes. They were intense. Like it really led, I think, a certain style of television that me and my grandma were talking about CSI the other day, and kind of how these shows started like taking things a little more seriously, and maybe like kind of going along with what the news was at that time. Like there was like a weird desensitization towards like crime. or at least like how the news portrayed it or whatever. Um, what else? Dharma and Greg. I thought that was funny. X Files as well. Thought that was pretty funny. But tons of shows also debuted in 1998, and not a lot of them necessarily lasted that long. But just a simple significance of all the shows, which are hilarious. Like Dawson's Creek, just to think about how referenced that has been in my generation, how kind of made fun of a little bit that has been made, like, but it wasn't like obviously the first teenage drama of its kind. It was just like my generation's like what we made fun of. But yeah, Dawson's Creek premiered that year. The True Life on MTV, which became a very popular series, which like I literally remember like diving into, and I think their first episode was on drug addiction. I think like something very basic, but that was the whole True Life thing, was like the whole being behind the scenes of people's lives and how they function and the true lives of people. Very 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 little title. And then they also had Cat Dog on Nickelodeon premiered. Teletubbies Came to America on PBS that year. Celebrity Deathmatch on MTV, which was like the claymation, like celebrities wrestling each other and super ridiculous. And there was like they had like a video game that came out, which I always remember like I was like too scared to like rent out because it was like I just like it was like when you saw Leisure Larry games and you're like, yeah, I definitely don't get that. That's funny. Celebrity Deathmatch, and it went on for a while. I think they tried to reboot it a couple of times too. Sex and the City premiered on HBO that year and created like a whole popularity, and has recently come back with their new series, not called Sex and the City. It's called something else. But still, it's got Carrie Bradshaw. It's got Sarah Jessica Parker, which is she's the main character, so it ties in the show, I think, completely. I guess I never really saw it. And also they had Young Hercules come on TV, as well as Hercules, like the animated Hercules series, which I kind of remember both those series a little bit. The Young Hercules was Ryan Gosling, I think, I'm pretty sure, a young Ryan Gosling right before Remember the Titans, and then they had the Hercules like animated series, which I remember. Whose Line Is It Anyways came on TV on ABC, which was crazy, and then they had Animorphs on Nickelodeon. They had the Wild Thornberries on Nickelodeon. I remember Nickelodeon being like the big like cartoon channel at that time. For sure. I remember they just had everything. They had like Doug, I think, as well at that time. The Rugrats at that time. Didn't come out in 1998, but still popular shows at that time. Also, Will and Grace came out at that time. Yeah, Will and Grace. That's funny. The Kings and Queens as well came out at that time. The Powerpuff Girls, sorry, not Powder, Powerpuff Girls came out at that time, which is crazy to think. And those are a lot of shows that like have become popular. Maybe like I said, because of my generation more so, they've stuck out in like significance, at least to me. But I think became popular in general pop culture and truly like shows that held on. And people like binge these shows till this day. I feel like people go back and watch these shows all the time till this day. And then there was a few shows that were ending at the time. Seinfeld, like I said, was one of those shows. Bill Nye, I guess, ended at the time, which was unfortunate. Bobby's World, which was a cartoon with Howie Mandel. I think he got like his own show in 1998 or around that time. So like the cartoon was just dying out. But I remember Bobby's World for some reason. Like I remember like going in arcades and having like there was like a Bobby's World like machine. I don't know if it's an arcade game, but it was like a machine. And then they also Murphy Brown, which I remember when they came back with it. They said it returned in 2018, and I remember when they came back with Murphy Brown, and I liked the chick that they had played Murphy Brown, the woman. Sorry, not chick. And then they Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman, which just makes me think of Talladega Nights, which is funny. Never watched that show, but tons of other shows. I would 100% always suggest people to go look and like look all this stuff up, and you get lost for hours and hours and hours, like I did for multiple days. I was lost and I was trapped in my computer screen, and nobody was letting me out. Felt like I was so blocked, and I didn't know how to format this episode, and so like and it's come out kind of a little scrambled, but it's funny just talking about all this stuff and thinking about back in the day and thinking about all this stuff. And um continuing on though, lastly I'm going to talk about video games, just a little quick little flash into the video games. I know that's not everybody's gig, but just from my soul in general, the number one selling console that year in gaming was the Sony PlayStation, which I think the PlayStation 2 till this day is the highest selling console of all time. So when PlayStation came on the market, they were like immediately like in your face, get ready for it. And I remember at that time the gaming kind of shifting from like Nintendo was always good at like the arcade style gaming, or like more so like kind of like the local play, like you sit down, you play with all your friends, and you're doing fun mini games, and you're kind of going through different levels. And then when PlayStation came out, it kind of centered on like story and graphics improved at the time, and PlayStation took advantage of that. Sorry. And I remember having a PlayStation. We had one of the first games I owned was Spyro, which came out that year in 1998. And I remember playing the hell out of Spyro, as well as Crash Bandicoot. I think Crash Bandicoot Warped came out that year, and I remember playing the hell out of Crash Bandicoot Warped and the other Crash Bandicoots as well. But I just remember that year specifically. Also, the Game Boy came out in 1998. It was like released in Japan earlier in the year, and then later it was released in the U.S. I think, or at least a version of it. And I had a Game Boy. I didn't have the first Game Boy, but I had the Game Boy Advance, which was like the sideways, like horizontal one a few years later. But the Game Boy literally, I think, changed gaming in a way, or at least like changed Nintendo, because like Nintendo had the 64 already, and then they would have the GameCube a couple years later. So it's not like they were like lulling in things, but that Game Boy, and then when the DS came out, and the fact that you could play Game Boy games on the DS is pretty incredible. So that's amazing to me. Yeah. Oh, I guess the N64. Oh no, it was already out by that time. Never mind. It was one of the best-selling consoles, obviously, and then also the Sega Dreamcast being one of the best-selling consoles, and I still have my Sega Dreamcast, and I remember like tons of games on that stuff, and it was such a short, like, lived product. It just felt like it never got the love, and it's only now that people talk about it. It feels like now it's like now that it's gone and nobody wanted to pay attention to it. We couldn't get like a Dreamcast 3.0, like, now that we got all these Xboxes and all these PlayStations. I love PlayStation, but I could use other consoles. And they've tried over the years, and Wii has done things, and they've tried, and Google, remember, did like the Stadia thing, and so there's been consoles that have tried, but just no success. Just no success. And then some of the games that I still literally I play till this day. It's kind of funny to think about all these games. Pokemon Red, Green, and Blue came out that year, which literally launched excuse me, sorry, excuse me, which launched the whole craze and like the Pokemon franchise and like people's love for Pokemon. And I remember watching like the show a little bit, kind of a little bit. And my sister had trading cards, my older sister, and I was more of a Yu-Gi-Oh fan. Yu-Gi-Oh was my generation more so, but those games, I mean, it's almost kind of sneaky that they kind of release the same formula a little bit, but just like new colors and like cool names. But they do change a little bit, and they obviously add all these Pokemon. But the classic, like, starter Pokemon, picking like Charizard, Squirtle, or Bulbasaur, like, classic starting question. And still till this day, just a fun game. I have a Pokemon game. I don't know. I'm not gonna pull it out, obviously, but I have a Pokemon like from like the mid 2000s. Resident Evil 2 came out, which I think like the first Resident Evil game really sparked like that like style of like the slower pace, like, really showed off what PlayStation could do. And then when Resident Evil 2 came out, they like increased the game, I think, a pretty significant amount. And it's still really honed in that like survival horror thing. And something that Resident Evil has gotten back to is that survival horror, because they kind of went off a little bit in like the fourth and fifth game, but it's one of the most classic survival horror games of all time. The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time came out, and I think I just remember more so Majora's Mask, which came out around the same time, and I just kind of remember that one more. But Ocarina of Time is a cult classic and a top game of all time for a lot of people. And I remember playing as a kid. I remember playing on N64 for sure. Specifically, like, I just remember like it was kind of like the style, and like it didn't have to look realistic because it was cartoony, and that's what kind of made the world like cool. It kind of had added to that whole fantasy aspect of it, which, Legend of Zelda has always been very good at doing for so long, since the 80s when they came out. You know what I'm saying? Also, Gran Turismo, the first Gran Turismo came out that year. GoldenEye 007 came out that year, which is crazy to think that's like everybody's introduction to like shooters, pretty much. At least my age was 007 for sure. I remember like eventually like Medal of Honor coming out, but 007 playing on N64, literally never understanding how to like aim in that game. It literally blows my mind. It frustrates me till this day, but it's funny. Just absolutely so funny to think about that game being as old as it is, and people still pull out their N64 and be like, "Well, bet you won't beat me at GoldenEye. I bet you I'll beat you at GoldenEye." It's still something that people fight over. It's funny. What else? And then what else? Banjo and Kazooie came out on N64, and that's a game that kind of got lost to time. But is a credible platformer, is what you would describe it. Something like I said, just got lost for time. Lost in time, but it was, when 3D like mapping was different, like where it wasn't 2D anymore, and people actually got the 3D scoping of the worlds, and like the camera angles were always like, fixed camera angles, which is what like Nintendo has been known for. So, and Banjo Kazooie was a great game, and it was like the world itself. Again, something that Nintendo's always done really well is create these fantasy worlds, incredible fantasy worlds. And I have a bunch of like Madden was like popular obviously that year, like Madden, FIFA, NBA. Like these games are always going to be popular for all these years. You know what I'm saying? Gex, dude, Gex, Enter the Gecko. Wow, I remember Gex. I remember watching trailers for it. I think like on TV. I remember playing it on PlayStation. I remember like it being like I said, PlayStation added like a more edgy vibe to the gaming community. So like, that was their platformer, and it was a platformer, it 100% was. But Gex was like cool as hell. You had the sunglasses and like a leather, I think you have like a leather jacket. Maybe I'm building it up in my head a little bit too much, but Gex Enter the Gecko, that's hilarious. Need for Speed 3 Hot Pursuit, which is a game that like I thought they remade maybe like however long ago, but Need for Speed, I didn't know, I kind of didn't know it. It like started in the 90s. I for some reason kept thinking in my head like the 2000s, but Hot Pursuit is one of like the most like well-known Need for Speed games, and I think till this day is like people's like introduction into racing games. If it's not for Gran Turismo, it's got to be like Need for Speed Hot Pursuit. Metal Gear Solid came out in 1998, which is unbelievable to think. It wasn't the first Metal Gear game, but it was Metal Gear Solid, and it was the first one that kind of like is what we know as today with Snake Plissken and like the whole like Solid Snake and like what we know as today. And legendary games till this day, legendary games, beautiful gameplays are fully in depth. The sneaking factor, which would be made also very popular in Splinter Cell when Tom Clancy made Splinter Cell like a couple years after that, or not Tom. He didn't make it, but it's Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell. And then I also had what else did I have? I had Spyro on there. I also what I thought was kind of crazy, especially with what these franchises are at today, is I had Fallout 2 came out in 1998, and this was before Fallout was bought out by Bethesda, like way before. And Bethesda, I think, is kind of what made them into the superpower of a game, especially with like Fallout 4 coming out was more so when Fallout I think burst into popularity. The third game was really popular. New Vegas was really popular, but it had to be four. But I think Fallout 2, like it was a prehistoric game, and I think it was still on computer at the time. It hadn't reached console, and it wasn't like the games would eventually be a first person or third person view, but this one was like a point and click. Like you'd have to like like kind of like those old school like like StarCraft or like RuneScape or something like that kind of style of gaming. It's just funny to think where it's come from that. And then also the Elder Scrolls Adventures Redguard came out. And if you're a big fan of Skyrim, that's the Elder Scrolls. And I remember I play Skyrim like crazy. I still to this day will plug it back in. I'll put it back in and play it every once in a while. I can't get away from it. One of the best games of all time, 100%. And this was when things were starting to build for the Elder Scrolls series. Redguard, I think, was like, I think I remember reading like it was one of the first kind of popular ones. That and then like Morrowind, and then eventually they would make like Oblivion, which kind of jump started the whole popularity, and then Skyrim kind of exploded everything. But just to think where those two as franchises are both owned by Bethesda, oddly enough, but to think where they came from and like where they're at now. And also I had Tomb Raider 3 came out that year. Half-Life came out that year, and Half-Life is such a legendary game. It's a game that people keep asking for another. Like they had like I think they put out two Half-Lives, and then they put out like a third one, which was like not like a part of the main series, but it was like a third installment. And the game that people ask for and people want so badly because it's unfinished. It's an unfinished story, and people want to hear from it. And it's a game. It's in a physics. The physics in that game was what kind of like was innovative at the time, like how objects interacted with the world, interacted with the world. And then I had what else did I have? That's it actually. NFL Blitz I think was like the last thing, but that's a niche game, and that's a game I do remember, but I remember playing like the arcade version more. But yeah, just a couple, of yada yadas, a couple video games. But yeah, that's it really. Honestly, that's so funny to think about like going through all that information. Man, I've been going for an hour and 15 minutes. It's a long episode, but I wanted to do this justice. I wanted to give 1998 a little shine. 25 years ago. It's kind of crazy to think that that's a quarter century, and like I said, it sounded better in my head than more than 20 years. It's 25 just sounded better, and just think that like how much those things actually still are relevant in my life and in most people's lives probably. I mean, people around my age, I was only born a couple years before that, so 1998 was in the vein of me growing up, and it took a long time for me to do this research. And I just wanted to get a little bit of everything, and I would suggest anybody just go research it on their own. Why not? Like, why not go and look at like some of these world events, or go look at some of these movies, and also like watch some of these things, or go listen to some of these songs, go play some of these video games, and just freshen up on it again. And 1998 it's a couple years before 2000, so it was gonna be popping, and it was popping. 100% it was popping. That's definitely something that people were saying in 1998, right? All right. I'm at the end of this episode. I'm pretty done. I'm sorry for taking a little bit longer on this episode. I had fun though. My next episode, I'm gonna do something quick, and I know I kind of always try to say that I'm gonna do it within a couple days, but my next episode is gonna be quick. It's gonna be like I don't have to take much time to process it or really prepare for it. So, I wanted to make sure I got episode 5, this episode out, and gave myself a chance to give myself like a little like detailing and research and actually like want to talk about this stuff, and anybody who can relate to this stuff and feels nostalgic like I do, like I said, go look this stuff up. Go relive 1998. There are so many great things. There's so many things that are so prevalent in my life. But all right, but without any more, like I'm done talking. I really am done talking. I'm a little tired. But I appreciate anybody who came in to listen. This has been the Odd Thoughts podcast. I have been your host, Gunther Getlicker, and I'm gonna post this up on YouTube. Like I said, my other episodes. I have 4 other episodes, so this is gonna be my 5th episode. Will be up on YouTube. You can follow me on Facebook under Gunther Getlicker, which is my name. You can follow me on Instagram, which is Gunther_Getlicker. Both G's and that are going to be lowercase. And then on Twitter, I go by at OneMikeGG. Both the G's are capitalized. But thank you, everybody. Like I said, this has been the Odd Thoughts podcast. My name is Gunther, and I just want to say to everybody, be excellent to each other.